Today, we're diving into a global health crisis that's kind of flying under the radar. It's about typhoid fever, a disease we thought we had a pretty good handle on. Well, it's evolving. The bacteria behind it are learning how to survive our best medicines, and it's turning into this really dangerous arms race. And that really brings us to the core question here. What on earth do you do when the very antibiotics that are supposed to save lives just stop working? This isn't some sci-fi scenario for the future. It's happening right now.
Okay, so let's just do a quick refresher so we're all on the same page. Typhoid fever is a super serious infection caused by the Salmonella typhi bacteria. It usually spreads through contaminated food and water, and yeah, if you don't treat it, it can absolutely be fatal. For decades, our go-to solution has been antibiotics. But that's where the story starts to get complicated. Because, well, the drugs are starting to fail in a lot of places. This whole phenomenon has a name: antimicrobial resistance. And honestly, it's one of the single biggest threats to global health we're facing today. The best way to think about it is like the bacteria are leveling up in a video game. First, you've got your basic antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. That's level 1. Then some of them evolve into multi-drug resistant strains, MDR for short. These guys can defeat the 3 classic go-to antibiotics we've relied on for years. But now we're seeing this new elite enemy emerge, extensively drug-resistant typhoid, or XDR. This thing is resistant to 5 different types of drugs, knocking out not just the classics, but some of our most powerful modern antibiotics too. So how do we know all this? Well, it's thanks to a massive research effort. This whole explainer is based on a huge systematic review that looked at almost 92,000 typhoid samples from 48 different countries over a 50-year span. I mean, look at this map. This gives us a truly global picture of what's going on, an unprecedented look at how this threat is actually spreading. And all that data tells a really fascinating and pretty worrying story. It's basically a tale of 2 continents, because this crisis is unfolding in very different ways in Africa and Asia. Let's break that down. So, over in Africa, the problem is that the old guard of resistant bacteria, those MDR strains we talked about, are just strengthening their grip. They're expanding like crazy. Meanwhile, in Asia, something even more alarming is happening. A brand new superbug, that XDR strain, has shown up and is starting to spread. Let's start with Africa. Just look at this number: 62.3%. That's the percentage of all typhoid cases analyzed from Africa that are now multi-drug resistant. It means the classic, affordable treatments, they're becoming useless for most patients there. And this chart just shows you how fast this has all happened. Back in the late 90s, you saw practically 0 MDR typhoid in Africa. By the late 2000s, it was already over 20%. And in the most recent period, from 2015 to 2022, it's absolutely exploded to over 70%. That is a terrifyingly fast acceleration. Now, even with all this bad news about MDR in Africa, there is one really crucial piece of good news, for now. So far, that even more dangerous superbug, the XDR strain, hasn't been detected there. So the continent is facing a huge challenge for sure, but it's not yet the absolute worst-case scenario that's starting to play out somewhere else. Which brings us to Asia, where the story completely changes. In Pakistan, which has been dealing with a major outbreak, an incredible 50% of typhoid cases are now the extensively drug-resistant XDR strain. 50%, half. This is the superbug that's resistant to almost everything we have. This chart here shows the rise in resistance to a class of stronger second-line antibiotics. In Asia, resistance to these critical drugs jumped from less than 2% to 17% in just a handful of years. That massive spike is basically the signature of the new XDR strain emerging and really taking hold. And let's be really clear, this isn't just a problem in Pakistan anymore. I mean, the numbers are still small, but that XDR superbug has now been found in neighboring India and also in Laos. This is how it starts. This is the beginning of a geographical spread that has global health experts, extremely worried. So, our treatments are failing. Where do we even go from here? Well, the researchers behind this huge study argue that the answer isn't just about finding better drugs, it's about better prevention. This quote from the study's conclusion really says it all. The rise of both MDR and XDR strains makes treatment incredibly hard and just highlights the urgent, desperate need for prevention, specifically through vaccination programs. And here's why that's such a brilliant strategy. Vaccines actually fight drug resistance on two different fronts. First, and this is the obvious one, they stop people from getting sick in the first place. But second, by preventing the illness, they reduce the total amount of antibiotics being used in a community. And if you use fewer antibiotics, there's less evolutionary pressure on the bacteria to become resistant. It's a total win-win.
All right, let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture here. This isn't just a story about one disease. It's about a 50-year-long arms race between human ingenuity and, well, bacterial evolution. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. MDR strains first popped up way back in 1973. Then, in the 90s, the bacteria figured out how to beat our next line of defense. In 2016, the XDR superbug was identified. And just recently, in 2022, we saw the first truly terrifying reports of resistance to a class of drugs that are often considered our absolute last resort. You can see the pace is picking up. Which leaves us with this final, and I think really critical question. These bacteria are adapting and evolving in a matter of years, maybe a few decades. Can our science, our policies, our global health strategies, can all of that move fast enough to stay one step ahead? The answer to that is going to determine the future of how we treat not just typhoid, but all bacterial infections.